We're going to begin. So my name is Nathan Alberg. I'm with the Liberty Prairie Foundation. Welcome to Buying Rural Farmland 101. We're really glad you're here. Through our program, Northeast Illinois Farm Link, we help farmers and landowners connect to each other. And as part of that work, we offer free advising to farmers and landowners. And through those conversations, we've gotten to know a lot of folks, and we've come to realize that there's a lot of people who, once they get a sense of their farming, they really want to get their own land. They want to be able to have a future on that land and make their dreams happen on one piece of land that they can really invest in. And from talking to a number of beginning farmers, we've also realized how complex the process of buying rural farmland can be. If you've bought a suburban property or a city property, you know a little bit about the process, but rural farmland is still a little bit of a challenge. If you've never bought a property at all, the complexity can be just overwhelming. In fact, I just came across a book recently that sort of, I thought, articulated that really well. It's called Meet the Frugal Woods, Achieving Financial Independence Through Simple Living. And in this book, a couple moves from a city in New England to a homestead in Vermont. And this is what they describe, just in one paragraph, the factors they're thinking about. So this woman who's writing, and her husband, Nate, she says, every few months, Nate and I would pop up to Vermont to tour properties with our long-suffering real estate agent. This search was a lot more laborious and tactile than our city house hunt because there are no open houses for rural homes. There's a much smaller inventory, and there are a multitude of factors to consider that don't exist in urban and suburban neighborhoods. The septic system, the well, the quality of the forest, the driveway, the road, siting of the home and outbuildings relative to the rest of the land, the presence or absence of neighbors, the acreage, the surrounding community, the distance to the grocery store, all this before even stepping inside a house. Nate and I wanted to buy a property that we loved, that we can envision ourselves living on for decades to come, and perhaps for the rest of our lives. And we didn't want to overpay. And we didn't want to build new, since it's nearly impossible to recoup the expense of building on account of the site work that's required in a rural setting. Digging a septic system and a well, putting in a driveway, plus the cost of the raw land to begin with. So from reading that and from all our conversations with you, we just realized it would be really helpful to give farmers kind of a roadmap and sort of a framework for how to think about the rural farmland property search and purchase. And so we're very fortunate to have, I think, three really helpful speakers today. We're going to have a realtor who focuses on selling rural properties, a lending specialist who focuses on helping small and beginning farmers who grow local food, buy land, and an appraiser who really understands how pricing and the value of rural properties works and can explain that to all of us. So we're really looking forward to sharing that with you. Just as a note, after every speaker, we're going to have time for Q&A with that speaker. And then at the end, we'll also have more of an open Q&A that you can be part of. One of the questions that I've already sort of planted in the minds of our three speakers is, obviously, as a farmer, you're really looking to find the very best possible value in what you buy, because you need that money to go really far, because you're also going to be farming and building infrastructure and that kind of thing. So that's one of the questions that we'll be asking all three of our speakers. So I also just want to start out as we get going by asking you in the chat if you could share the city you're from, and if you're a farmer, share the city you're from, and if you're not from Illinois, the state as well. I think we have some people from some other states. Second, if you're a farmer, I'm going to launch a poll. At least I think I'm going to launch a poll, which is going to ask you the question: what part of finding and buying rural farmland do you have the most questions and concerns about? So pick one. I'm hoping that this will give us all, and our speakers in particular, a kind of idea of what you're thinking about or what you're most nervous about. And as you work on that, I'm just going to finish some other sort of business to get started. In the registration process, all of you completed some questions about your background. And we learned that many of you are diversified farmers, as well as there's some focused farmers like livestock, vegetables, and that kind of thing. We also learned that on a scale of 1 to 5, that most people felt like they were at a 2 in terms of their confidence level in understanding the rural farmland purchase process. And I also want to thank, sort of introduce ourselves a little bit further. So the Liberty Prairie Foundation is a nonprofit organization that runs a 94-acre farm here in Grays Lake in the beautiful Prairie Crossing Conservation Community. We use our programs and our farm to pursue our mission, which is to conserve and regenerate land. Our particular program that is hosting this is called Northeast Illinois Farmlink. It's a land access program that connects landowners and farmers in Northeast Illinois. You can find more information about us at illinoisfarmlink.org. I want to thank Jim Kirchadina, my colleague who's on the call, who's spinning the dials and helping us out with this. I really appreciate that. We have a number of our partners on the call. Thank you for all that you do with us and for sustainable farming. And a number of you in your registration process made donations to us. So we're really grateful for that too. Finally, I want to express our gratitude to two of our underwriters of our programming and our work. They are Food Land Opportunity, FLOW, localizing the Chicago Food Shed, which is a multi-year funding initiative of the Chicago Community Trust and the Kinship Foundation. The aim of that initiative is to create a resilient local food economy that protects and conserves natural resources. They have been extremely generous. We're really grateful to them. We also are supported in part by the USDA's Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. A few details about today's webinar. Please use the chat for sharing questions that we can address as we go. And we ask everyone that you mute your sound so we don't get that distracting background noise. And if you could stop your video feed at least during the presentations so we have as much bandwidth as possible. And this will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out to everyone who registered. So again, we're going to start out with the realtor, Deanna Ballweg. No one actually finished the poll, or maybe I did that wrong. I'm just going to end it. We'll figure that out later. Oh, wait a minute, share results. Anyway, I'm just going to close that out. So Deanna, let me just read her introduction, and then I'm going to say just a little bit more about how we're going to do this portion. Deanna is a senior executive associate with First Weber Group, Southern Wisconsin's largest real estate agency. She has facilitated over 1,000 real estate transactions, including many rural farms, and has been ranked in First Weber's President's Club every year since 1992. Her specialty is the sale of rural properties, and she has a special affinity for farming and farmland. She grew up on a dairy farm and carried out field work, milking cows, and other chores on a daily basis. Deanna, by the way, we're going to do it with Deanna. We're actually going to do this as sort of an interview, a conversation. So think of this as being like at your kitchen table. You're going to have a chance to sort of interact and share questions with a really knowledgeable real estate person who's also very much simpatico and really wants to see local farmers like you succeed. And so I'm going to begin with a first question. Deanna, how did you get from being on a dairy farm to getting into real estate?
Good question. My father always delved in a lot of real estate on the side. And as we grew up, our family had 7 farms, and he also had a car dealership. So I sold cars for a while, so I knew how to hustle selling vehicles. And when I was out one day looking for a home, the realtor that was showing me homes was the broker of the company and asked me if I wanted a job. And since I had always been around real estate through my father's investments, I stepped into it.
Wow, that's great. That's awesome. So let me start out first before we get into a lot of the details. Do you have any general tips or principles, just overall guidance that you would suggest or offer to beginning farmers who are starting to think about rural farmland?
Um, in general, I would start with a lot of road trips and I would start to find out different areas that are of interest and go out and see the countryside, stop at the places, the local communities, etc., and get a pulse for the community and see if that's where you'd like to hang your hat.
Got it. Excellent. And in general, how long does it normally take to for a buyer to find a rural farmland property that they actually can close on?
I think a lot of them find a sweet spot within a couple months' journeys, just on road trips and things of that nature.
So you mean in terms of the area, but in terms of beginning to look to actually closing on a property about
To actually closing on a property, it can be, you can get lucky and do it in a year. Most is somewhere between 3 to 5 years.
so start early
Hmm.
if you know if
Yes.
you're going to start. So I know one of the questions that's come up is how does a person who wants to buy a property, how do you find a realtor that you're going to work with and you really enjoy working with? And how do you find them? How do you know if you're working with a good one?
I would do a few things. I would go on to Google and I would Google in the region that, I've chosen or different areas and just kind of see who's out there, which agents are there, how long is their experience, do they specialize? I would go into the community in where I'm looking and I would talk to lenders. And if there's a financial institution that you're comfortable with, and I would see if they would recommend anyone. And I would also go out to uh, maybe a country tavern and hang out with some farmers and have a beer and find out what they have to say and
Got
who
it.
they recommend.
Do most realtors are they most effective in the area that they know? We've seen sometimes realtors selling properties. It seems like outside of their home zone. Is that a good idea, or should you really find a realtor who's specialized in the area you want to be in?
You definitely need to find an agent that specializes in the region that you're in. You have
Okay.
to ask them if they're comfortable, if they've had previous sales in that area. That's extremely important. We have kind of a standard joke among agents that a property might sell high if an out of town realtor comes in because they maybe are used to inflated values
Got
where
it.
they're coming from outside markets.
And so once you've looked around and talked to a few realtors, perhaps, is there an agreement, or how do you lock in with a realtor so that they're going to serve you?
So once you establish an agent that you're comfortable working with, and there's a contract called a buyer agency, but I would definitely go out with that realtor a few times on some showings. They'll take you out and tour you to the properties and make sure you're comfortable with them and their expertise and that they're
Hmm.
willing to work with you. And
Okay.
then you would sign into a buyer agency agreement. The buyer
Okay.
agency, yes,
And that's exclusive.
correct. So you'd
Got
be
it.
working with just that agent, yes.
Right. And then how do they get paid? And how much do they get paid?
Realtors are paid by the sellers. The sellers take care of the commission and they're paid at closing and it comes out of the purchase price by the seller. The buyer does not pay to be represented in a buyer agency agreement. There may be some fees, which I call gas tax, where a realtor might charge to drive you around, but I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, got it. And so what are all the things that a realtor should normally do for the potential buyer?
Uh, Definitely make sure, first of all, that the buyer's been pre-qualified with their lender
Yep.
and that they have that established and they know their buying power. And then the realtor would then set up criterias within
Mm.
the multiple listing service, which is the
Yep.
MLS, and they would help them, find properties, pricing, everything, and then put them on an auto email list and see what comes up out of there, if it's vacant land or farmettes or farms, whatever you have in mind. Take them around the area, let them understand the area, and just kind of do a broad guideline for that for starters.
Okay. Excellent. So any advice about once you've got a realtor, you have some basic criteria about how to vet and kind of look at properties so that even before you make an offer or something, you have an idea of whether a property is a good fit for you or not?
Absolutely. You'll visit the property with the realtor, and I would take my clients out to the property, and I would ascertain with them the condition of the property. There's a lot of older farmettes out there that might not have a good structural integrity about them. I would ask a lot of questions. I call it my homework when I'm there at the showing with my buyer. And if they're new to farm rural living, then I start taking over and asking the questions, how old is the septic? Um,
Mm,
how deep is the well? Things of that nature that I start, getting into, and just to get an overall feel for the property.
got it. So why don't we start out, once you do find a property, how does the negotiation and kind of purchase process work? Can you say a little bit more about how that works? And
Sure.
take as much time as you like. I think this is the heart of what we're talking about.
Okay, so when you go out and let's say you've looked at three, four properties, and then all of a sudden the right one comes up, and you go to that property and you have some questions and some concerns. So you let your realtor know what those are going to be, which we'll get into in a second. And the realtor then decides, okay, do you want to make an offer? And you're like, yes, and you're qualified by your lender. So you sit down and you do an offer to purchase. The offer to purchase, if it's vacant land, that's one offer to purchase typically. And if it has like a rural homestead on it or something, that's another offer to purchase. So there's,
Mm.
different contingencies, and contingencies are terms in the offer that are there to protect you, to give you time to figure out if you have concerns or questions, or for the seller to provide tests and things like that. So you would make an offer. You would, let's say you found a $300,000 ferment. You would make that offer, and you would say, okay, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to put down earnest money. It means that
Mm.
you're earnest in the process, and that's one of the contingencies. So if the seller accepts your offer, you would put in earnest money. It's usually $1,000 per 100,000. So that would be $3,000 earnest money. And then that would be deposited with the realtor and then credited back to you towards your down payment at closing. But before you get to that accepted offer, we would have this contract with all of these contingencies, and we'll go to these contingencies, and the seller then can counter those terms, and then the buyer can counter back the terms again.
Mm.
In the meantime, maybe there's another party and another buyer over here. Even though you've already made an offer on the property, if it's not accepted, the terms, and signed by the seller, you do not have right of first refusal. Anybody can step in at any minute and buy the property out from underneath you. So you have to be expeditious and have to have everything kind of formatted and together once you start. Um, so you would have the earnest money contingency on there. Sometimes you'd submit earnest money up front if you knew it was a popular property. You would have a home inspection contingency on there, which the buyer would pay for. The home inspection would cost you probably around $400 to $450. And you're looking for defects. You're looking for things that could have an adverse fact on the structural integrity of the property, a safety issue like something like a cracked heat exchanger in a furnace. So all of a sudden you have carbon monoxide in the house. So you have an inspection contingency on the offer, and that you're looking for defects. That's usually done within the first 10 days of the offer. And if you have any concerns within that realm or defects pop up, and you're like, my goodness, we didn't know that the rafters were broken in the roof. We didn't know that we had ingress or egress to the property, that it wasn't legal. All these type of things you can walk at that point, depending how it's written, but that's typically how that's designed. Other contingencies that you would put on there for a rural property would be a septic, to make sure the septic's in working order. If it has a septic, to make sure the well's in working order and meets code, and to make sure that you test the water. The water, typically your lender will ask for arsenic, bacteria, and nitrates, and to make sure all those levels are safe. So those criteria for those three contingencies, well, water, and septic, that's usually like a 21-day format is standard. You would have it subject to your financing. Do you need to sell your house? That's something. Is the property purchase subject to you actually selling your home taking the proceeds from your home, and that would be for the down payment. If it's subject to a home sale, that's a big contingency, and that's called a bump clause. So if you see anything in the MLS called AO accepted offer with a bump, it means that the buyer has an accepted, or the seller has an accepted offer subject to a home selling. Other contingencies, if it's vacant land, you want to put on there usually subject to a survey. You want to make sure, like if you're buying a 120-acre farm, you want to make sure you're getting the 120 acres. Because if you're paying $7,000 per acre or $8,500 per acre, and then you have a survey done and you find out you only have 118.6 acres, then you should get a credit off the purchase price. Things of that nature.
Got it. Why do they call it a bump clause?
So the bump clause would be, it's called a right of first refusal clause, but realtors, the slang is bump. So what
Okay.
happens is the seller has an accepted offer with you. You would be the primary buyer. Somebody else comes along 2 weeks later, they see the farmland and they're like, wow, we want to make an offer. The listing agent says, you can make an offer, but we have a primary offer in place. You would have to make an offer in secondary place. That comes together, it's in secondary place, seller and buyer come to terms. That primary buyer, so let's say that's us with that $300,000 offer, and yet we have to sell your home. You have 72 hours, 48 hours, whatever the contract says, that you have to provide that you can afford 2 homes at once to purchase, which usually you cannot. That's why you have the bump clause in there, or you get bumped. And the secondary offer now becomes the primary offer.
Wow.
You do receive your earnest money back. So if you had $3,000, you will get that back. Your contract's canceled. If you had a home inspection that you paid for, you're out the home inspection money.
Okay. So let me just understand. So I think in most people are in a situation, like you said, where they were going to have to sell their first property to be able to afford the second property. How long does the purchase agreement usually give them to sell the property before kind of time is up?
Typically, I would say 90 days, 3 months is good. In this market, what we're experiencing right now, some sellers won't look at offers that are subject to sale.
Wow.
It's too fast of a market.
Wow.
But I encourage all buyers to write, because you never know when that seller needs more time to do what they're doing as well.
Got it. So how fast can that negotiation process happen? You make an offer. Is that like a few days? Is it a week? How quick does the back and forth go?
So if I make an offer with my client and we go over the complete offer and they're comfortable with that and they want me to submit that to the listing agent, I would usually give them the same day turnaround or within 24 hours.
Okay.
So the seller knows they want to sell their home. They're going to be expeditious in that. If they're not, it's a bit troubling. But you want to keep a tight window, because you want to make sure that others don't get in on the process. Because what an agent will do, a listing agent, is if somebody makes an offer, a realtor shows up with an offer, they might show their clients that they've been showing and say, hey, an offer's on the table. If you want to write, you got to go now. So then the seller can choose between offers and which one suits them the best.
Okay. All right. So we're having some questions. Some of them are about financing, which I might be better for Paul. But let me just ask one more question about the process, and then we'll take a few of these questions. One I've seen increasingly that there are like offer letters where the buyer writes some sort of personal letter to the seller about why they want would be have special value to them to buy the property. We just sold my mom and dad's property, and we got a really nice offer letter that kind of made us think about that. Do offer letters help? How should you think about that offer letter?
Offer letters usually win, but I'm going to tell you that that's changed since this year, in that fair housing is looking at that as maybe a discriminatory practice.
Oh.
So some sell, because it gives that, that opens up that door. And
Yep.
so, us as listing agents, we're instructed not to take those letters. But what I do advise, so I just was I'm in a bidding war right now which is an everyday occurrence right now. So I had my buyer tell me more about them and why they wanted the property, so I could tell them about my buyer verbally. So I did that. No pictures, nothing like
Okay.
that, not the dog. I just did that.
Okay. One question we have here is there the possibility of losing earnest money at any point?
There definitely is. If you get cold feet and all of a sudden you think that you're in over your head, or you changed your mind and a different property came up, you could lose your earnest money. But also remember that you're signing a legitimate contract, and you could get sued for specific performance. Specific performance is that the seller says, wait a second, we took our property off the market. You're our buyer. We're going to closing. You said you wanted it. Now we're going to sue you to buy it.
Whoa.
Um, so that could happen. So just always be careful with your contingencies. There's several other contingencies that could go in there that we could talk about.
Okay. So I'm assuming that that period of negotiation and getting to sort of a purchase agreement can be kind of intense. Any advice about just kind of keeping your cool while things kind of heat up and maybe if there's some competition?
I think it's really important to have an agent that, keeps communicating with you, and you make
Mhm.
sure that that's important, because no news is new news. You know, um, for instance, I presented an offer and they're not going to answer me till next week, Wednesday. So, because that's when their family gets together. So I feel that real estate is a roller coaster that needs a lot of patience. So
Got it.
you need those two pieces. There's a lot of
Got
ups
it.
and downs.
Got it. Um, Here's a great question from Oscar. As a buyer, are there some things you see as big red flags in listings for rural farms and farmettes that we should keep an eye out for?
Absolutely. And an underground storage tank. So you
Ah,
want to make sure that that would be taken care of.
when
A
you,
dump, Mhm.
when you say taken care of, what do you mean?
The seller has to comply with federal and local regulations to have that removed.
Okay.
Um, an oil tank that's not in use in an old farmhouse, if they're not in use, they legally have to remove them.
Okay.
Um, and debris piles on farms. So in the old days, farmers just went to the back 40 and dropped the
Pause.
junk. So, and lots of it. So please make sure that you walk all, the entire property, and that you have an agent that, goes and walks the entire acreage with you. And there's a real estate condition report that the
Hmm.
seller will fill out, and to the best of their ability, answer such questions, which should guide you.
Excellent. And I guess this probably leads into the next question of once you've signed the purchase agreement, you have those contingencies, and you're going to work through inspectors and different things. Here's a question. Is there a way, who covers the cost of a survey and what would it cost?
That's debatable. Typically, it's the seller, because they have to convey to you, how much acreage do they really have. So you can look, and the tax bill will tell you how much acreage it is, but that's not necessarily true. It has to be actually surveyed to know the right amount. Uh,
Okay.
but it could be the buyer in this market.
Oh, really?
It could cost anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 is the average.
Wow. Wow. There's another question here. Is there a way to detect buried debris piles?
There really isn't. The worst one I ever saw was it looked like the grass was glowing, and it was a former dump where glass and projects were dumped. Um, but just walking the property and doing due diligence of walking the property. Most typically, that's how you find things, or ask a neighbor.
Okay. Here's a question. Are there soil perk tests you can require?
Absolutely. If you're doing a vacant land purchase, or even like a farm, and you want to make sure that you have a building site and that it'll perk for a septic system, so you can put in a perk test.
Can you explain what a perk test is?
A perk test says if the property will sustain a conventional septic system, which would be an in-ground septic system.
Okay.
Otherwise, they'll do soil borings. And if the soil borings come up to be, well, maybe it's an at grade, then it'll be a low grade above ground septic system. or a mound could be a high above ground septic system if there's certain soils that won't hold um, waste.
Okay, so again, and who's paying for the soil perk test?
Typically the buyer, because they have the intent to build or do something of that nature. Sometimes the seller will have one on tap, but you want to make sure that it's in the area where you want to build as well.
Okay. All right. So I grew up in the inner city of Chicago, had no idea what a septic system was. Just in case there's anyone on the call who doesn't know what a septic system is, can you briefly explain that?
Yes, it's where the effluent goes from the house and it's held there, and you have a holding tank for solids, which is pumped out once every 3 years or 2 years, whatever the county mandates. And then you
Yep.
have a drain field where the liquids go, and those permeate in time.
Oh, great. Nice.
Oh, one thing to note, if it's a
Yeah.
smaller parcel and it's an old septic system, make sure there's room for a secondary site.
Okay. Just in case.
Yes, because if you're buying an old farmette, might be, or an old farm, it might be the original septic system. And if you're only buying 10 acres or 5 acres, just make sure there's room for a secondary site.
And how much room would that normally require?
Um, Not much. I'd say, 100 by 200 or something like that, if that.
Okay. Excellent. So I guess this also gets to the question of one of the contingencies is the inspections. So can you say more about the inspections and how to find a good inspector for a rural property and what they're looking for?
Um, for a rural property, your realtor should be able to give you really good
Okay.
inspectors, and they should have a list, with 6 or 7 inspectors on it, 3 as a minimum. And then you
Okay.
would call them each up and vet them out as to who you felt most comfortable with. And you're just really looking in farmhouses for structural integrity. You're looking for old wiring, so you want to make sure that the wiring is not knob and tube. Knob and tube are the old fuses, and it's cloth wiring. So you'll see like these white insulators. The secondary market, as Paul Dittman will tell you, will not accept that, and the appraiser will also catch that if you have um, this type of wiring. So that would have to be redone by the seller or by the buyer prior to closing typically.
Okay. And how about wells?
The well,
Yeah. What would an inspector be looking for in terms of the wells?
so for the well, water, and septic, you would have a plumber for those inspections.
Oh.
So you want to make sure if it is the inspector that they are also a licensed plumber, which is atypical, but some are. And
Okay.
so the plumber would make sure that the well's up to code and, check the water test. It could be if it's an older wellhead that it's loose and there's such an insect called earwigs that love water and they like to crawl in there and give, it's like bacteria. And so all of a sudden the water's tainted and then
Okay.
the well would have to be shocked with chlorine.
Okay. So again, a good plumber or an inspector who's a certified plumber would be able to figure out whether that well system was in good shape or not.
Correct. I usually have 2 inspectors. I just like more eyes. I like
Two.
just a regular inspector and then a
Oh,
plumber. I just really want a
okay.
specialist. And then
Got it.
that plumber will also tell me if I have a secondary septic site.
Got it. Okay. Anything else? Any other contingencies that are going to be looked at? Obviously, the status of any outbuildings, other infrastructure, any other parts of that that are worth talking about?
I think it's really important if you're looking for just like a really nice, vacant land, but you'd like to build a house on there someday, that you're checking into um, is there a building right? Can you build on the property? And that the realtor would find through the township
Okay.
for you and the county, the township and the county. They're the ones who rule over the jurisdiction of the property. So calls would have to be made there. You want to make sure that you have proper ingress and egress. You'd
Okay.
want to make sure the boilerplate in most offers is that you get to review what's called a title commitment. And the title commitment is something that you would have your attorney review prior to closing to make sure there's no outstanding easements on the property.
Mhm.
That all of a sudden there's an easement running right down the middle of your property where someone can drive over your land.
Okay. And what are what are things that you're looking for in terms of egress and ingress in terms of that could be potential issues?
So sometimes you would buy property more so like on a state highway. So you have to make sure that the DOT will allow ingress and egress. And
Oh,
so that it's a legal entrance. There are
okay.
a lot of existing farm roads that would suffice, but sometimes they would say, no, if you're going to build, you need to go over here and do it for safety concerns.
Okay. Um, so what about someone was just asking what do those terms mean? I think they might mean. Do you mean Nicholas? If you could clarify, maybe you're meaning. Do you mean yeah, egress and ingress? Can you clarify that?
Entrance and departure of a property, legally
Okay.
driving in and out.
Okay. And there is there an issue with? I know I've seen many rural properties are very close to the country road, but there are some that have very long driveways. And I assume that you might want to think about that if you're ready to plow during winter. Is that something to think about?
Well, for one thing, you would want to, if it's a building site eventually, or if it's an old farmette where you're going to build, make sure the utilities are into the site because
Huh.
you'd have to pay per foot for utilities. If you don't have a road, you would have to put that driveway in, which is quite
Right.
expensive. And some townships have a limitation on how long that driveway can be.
Okay. So, but in terms of an existing property, is it better to have a short driveway in terms of maintenance? Or, I mean, long driveway kind of gets you further back away from the road and from traffic.
Yeah, it just, if you like the setting and just so you
Okay.
understand that you have a tractor or something to get yourself out in the winter in Wisconsin or Illinois.
Got it. Does anyone have any more questions about what we've covered so far? Please enter those in the chat. I think we're doing pretty well. There were some um, financing questions that I think we might bring up with Paul. I think that might be a better fit. One question from Nancy was, how do you find financing for land with no home? And for land with a home, I had a lender tell me they don't make loans on property where the land had more value than the home. Any?
I will defer to Paul on that
Okay.
one or an appraiser. But we haven't run into that because I usually use a specialist in ag when it comes to that. And
Okay.
Paul would just, come to the rescue with his cape.
Okay. So how about if we cover that with Paul when we get to his presentation? Someone was saying my brain hurts. That's okay. Just hang in there. Um,
I can appreciate that. It's a lot.
yeah, we're throwing a lot at you right now. Um, someone says area has a 1 to 1.5 to 2 year wait to get a water meter. So water access is important to ask. Um, all right, so let me just keep moving and we'll keep looking at the questions. What about closing? Can you say something about closing, assuming all the contingencies work out and your offer's been accepted? Can you say just a few things about how closing works?
Sure, absolutely. So when the contingencies are removed, you would remove contingencies by either negotiation or just, they're satisfied. The water tests were good. And
Okay.
once all these contingencies are removed, you would go to closing. And closing would be typically at the title company. They're a fiduciary that handles all the paperwork for the lender, all the paperwork for the realtor in the end. And then they would put everything on a closing statement, and you would be able to see all your numbers with the lender that you spoke with your lender on there. And let's say that maybe there was a home inspection and there was a bad furnace, and we discovered that, and they're going to give you a credit for a new furnace. That would go
Mm,
on the closing statement if that was agreed to.
got it. So is it pretty normal for there to be a lot of give and take on the contingencies? So like if the inspection finds an issue and the homeowner agrees to fix it or they go back and forth, is that pretty normal?
Yes, very normal. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Especially in older properties.
Okay. Then we have a question here. Do you deal with purchases of land that is where the land is currently being leased out to farmers for use? Uh,
Absolutely. Mhm.
how are those relationships dealt with upon sale?
So we just did one, and it was a 140-acre farm, and the farmer had 1 year left on his lease. Our
Okay.
buyer in this case wanted the lease to be extended another 2 years because they weren't ready to move up for 2 years.
Got it.
And so we went as a term of the offer, subject to extending the lease at the current rate and having a termination, which the farmer, the tenant loved that because farmland's hard to find.
So, so is there a legal obligation if the current owner has a 3-year lease agreement with the farmer and he's selling it at the end of year one with the changeover in ownership? Is that lease still in effect for 2 more years?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, so that's something that a buyer should know what those terms are for any existing leases.
Correct. Hmm.
Okay. Um, okay, here's a good question. Are there realtors that specialize in farms, or would all realtors generally be equally open to helping with buyers of farms?
I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to back up to where you can find a lot of stuff is, of course, when you're looking at Zillow or realtor.com, the realtors that you may see next to certain pictures aren't necessarily the professional that works on the farm. Those are paid ads. So,
Oh,
yeah, so it's important to know that. I really think that you need to find a specialist. And, if it's in a certain region, there's different realtors that you can reach out in your area if you know a realtor, and they can go and refer you to a specialist in an area that you're looking. That's another area that a realtor can find someone for you.
okay. We had a question. I'm not see if I can track this. Is getting title insurance sufficient to make sure there are no liens on the property? And can you first just define what a lien is?
So a lien would be a debt against the property. So like a mortgage, like the seller owes, $80,000 yet. So that would have to be paid off at closing and show up on the closing statement what the
Wow.
payoff is. Um, and that's quite sufficient as long as you have an attorney review that title commitment. And the attorney will look for what we call encumbrances, which are
Hmm.
not only liens against the property, but also maybe some quirky little deed restriction that maybe the property could never be built upon or any oddity. So
Okay.
yeah, and it only costs like $100 to $150 to have an attorney review a title commitment near the end of the whole process.
Okay. And is
Compared,
that separate from title insurance, or how does title insurance relate to hiring an attorney to look at liens and other things?
so the seller will provide you with title insurance. You'll
Okay.
receive that prior to closing, and then you would
Okay.
have your realtor, if you don't have a real estate attorney, recommend one. And then
Okay.
it's sent over to the attorney to review on behalf of the buyer.
Okay. We have a question. When a seller says they're selling it as is that just an out for being responsible for fixing problems?
As is, yes, means that, they don't want to fix the problem, but you as a buyer still have the right to inspect the property. And so that all day long, because a lot of even realtors misunderstand as is. And also, as is doesn't mean that you can't negotiate. So maybe they don't want to fix the problem, but they'll give you $5,000 credit for a bad roof or 15,000. And then
Um,
once you discover that the roof is leaking or the roof doesn't look good after the inspector, then you can hire a professional roofer to look at the roof to get a bid. That's
got
part of
it.
the negotiations.
Here's a question. Do you ever see groups of people buying land together? Are there things to consider with an arrangement like that? I think what she means is, or what they mean, I think, is people who are not the same family, but who are teaming up together to buy land.
I would just be really careful in that. And I would have an LLC with all the partners in it. And then I would also have an agreement, a business agreement between the partners. What if somebody all of a sudden changes their mind and wants to just be done with this project, or all of a sudden you're disagreeing on something? How do you rectify those issues? I would never do it without consulting a real estate attorney,
Okay, got
even
it.
even if you're family or friends.
Okay, got it. What about real estate attorneys? Is that someone you can also find through your realtor, or is that a something that you should really be paying a lot of attention to?
I think you can find that through your realtor. If you can't, I can't kind of have a question mark. So that might be a good question for your realtor up front.
Okay. Okay. Got a question. Would you say it's easier to buy an old farmette, being a small property with farmhouse and some acres, or an abandoned farm or vacant lot? I'm asking for my wife and I who plan to buy something like a farmette for our first home purchase. Currently, we rent, but we have enough for a down payment now. We won't have a house to sell, just cash to put down. Looking for the least headache, but also the best bang for the buck.
Well, if you don't mind sweat equity, best bang for the buck is usually a farmette. The farmette's usually your biggest headache. So just because, there's usually remodeling and things like that to do. But I really think that there's a lot of diamond in the roughs out there. And I sold one couple of farmette that 90% of the people would have bulldozed it. That property is now worth just under $1 million because they did the right things to it.
Wow. So
And
assuming that the couple or the couple in this case has some renovation expertise, a farmette might be best rather than perhaps buying building a home or something.
um, that, or else if you have family members or people in the trades that could help you
Okay.
along. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think we're covering everything pretty well. Um, what about zoning? How does zoning relate to whether a property might be a good fit or not? Are there surprises? Or from what I've heard, it seems like every county has different zoning systems, and that I've talked to people who sometimes have a rude surprise when they think they can do something and then they can't. Any comments about zoning?
I think it's really important to convey to your realtor what exactly it is that you want to do. Do you want to do an organic farm with a wedding venue? Do you want to have a CBD store eventually? Just
Mm-hmm.
it depends. Roadside market. So some of those would require a conditional use permit that runs with the people, not necessarily with the property, with the use. So
Okay.
you would maybe want to have the offer contingent upon your use and to make sure that the zoning works for it.
Okay. And so are most county zoning departments pretty open to you making a call, like a regular person making a call and asking about the zoning and what that would permit and not permit?
Absolutely. That's what they're there for. You would call planning and zoning office, and you would you would also have to call the township. And the township has a chairman, and you'd be
Okay.
looking for the chairman to help you too. So you want to make sure that you're good with the township and good with the county.
Got it. We have a question, and this I think relates to a larger question is, what the question is, do you have any experience around buying land through a county's tax auction?
Um, I have I have not done that. I know of different realtors that do. Um, and you have to be careful if there's any back fees or things that you have to pay up front, any debt.
Mm.
There's some foreclosure things that you have to be careful of. So just be cautious of hidden fees and make sure that's very, very clean cut, specified.
Okay, great. Um, what about taxes on farm properties? I think the question might be like, are taxes on farm properties generally less than taxes you might have on a suburban property or city property? Any thoughts about that?
So the state of Wisconsin has use value assessment, and you'll have to tell me if that's in other areas. Use value assessment
Sure.
means the farmer's taxed at a lower rate. So
Okay.
if you do change zoning and you take part of that farmland and put it where you want to put up a house or something, that parcel that you split, that could then be taxed at a higher rate. And then
Okay.
not all farmland, like in certain townships up here where I live, can you take a tillable 40 acres and put a building site on it if it's existing farmland? It depends on
Okay.
the township and the ag use.
Okay. Um, One person asks, "What is it? What's the definition actually of a farmette? Can you define that?"
Sure, typically anything 40 acres or less.
40 acres less. Does it
Yeah,
usually
I don't think
give?
there's an exact number to it.
Okay,
A lot of them are 5 or 10.
okay, and they usually come with a home, I presume.
Yes. Yeah, they have to
Okay,
get a home on it.
got it. We have a question here. Any tips on making your offers stronger besides offering more money? Writing a letter, offering more earnest money, willing to close fast, something else?
Offering non-refundable earnest money if you fail to close for any reason. That's
Wow.
risky, but that's a big one.
Yep.
Another one would be, so you have the offer not subject to appraisal, but if your lender needs it subject to appraisal, then do you have the extra cash to make up the difference?
Huh.
So if the property is listed at 300, but you offered 350 for it, but the property only appraised out at 325, do you have $25,000 cash extra to make up the difference? And then you'd put that in the offer. You would put in, if there's any defects in the inspection, that you would say the first accumulative $5,000 worth of issues that you would pay for yourself. You can also say that you would pay for the seller's closing costs up to a certain dollar amount.
Wow. It seems like that's the kind of market we're in right now, where you really have to make your offer stand out.
Yeah, you do. And a lot of realtors know the tricks, but if they don't know that, and the other key is an accelerator clause. So an accelerator clause is used in bidding wars a lot. So because, it's blind bidding like eBay, you don't know what you're getting into. Properties listed at 300, you're saying you'd go up to 350. There's 6 offers on the table. The listing agent's working with the seller and going over 6 offers. Your accelerator can say that your highest number is, instead of 350, let's say 351, and that within $1,000 increments against other offers. So if there's one offer at 325 and that's the highest next offer, your offer goes up 1,000, it's 326. Even though
Huh.
you said that you'd pay 351, you only have to pay 326. The
Hmm.
the seller has to then email you that offer, because a realtor can't disclose terms of offers, and show the proof of why you had to pay 326, because maybe you started your offer out at 300 and then
Got
the
it.
escalator took you to that.
Got it. Excellent. Question: is the market for farms and farmettes hot too? Along with, like right now, obviously we're in the suburbs in Chicago, seeing a lot of the market's just kind of crazy. Is that the same case with farms and farmettes?
I've kind of never seen it hotter, but that doesn't mean, I think also buyers are becoming fatigued and they're kind of sick and tired of this bidding war market. So it takes a special buyer that has a little bit extra money in their pocket to do the fixing up. So you got a good shot at getting a farmette for close to list instead of paying over list. And
Okay.
again, maybe it's overpriced. A lot of properties are overpriced, so your realtor could help you with that. Everything's inflated, but then there's really overpricing a property.
Got it. All right, we're still getting a lot of questions, but I want to hit just a few last points to make sure we cover those. What about for sale by owner? I know a story of a friend who happened to be riding her bike. They were looking for farmland, and just as she was riding by, a landowner was bringing out his sign that said "for sale by owner." And they talked, and the husband came by the next day and talked to the landowners, and they eventually bought it. Um, any thoughts about for sale by owner? What are the ins and outs of that?
So with my clients, if it's a for sale by owner, I have in my buyer agency that I charge a rate that's less if it's a for sale by owner.
Okay.
So sometimes maybe there's a 7% commission rate, a 6% commission rate. I charge 3% or 3.5%, depending on what's all involved. And so the buyer would finance that amount in with the purchase price, but then they have my expertise.
Got it.
So
So,
this,
so give me an example. Like, we have a whole do-it-yourself culture in our world. Like, give me an example of where you and as a realtor would sort of be able to sort of make a huge difference for a buyer. in that kind of situation?
I've seen sellers point out lot lines all the time and buyers going, okay, those are the lot lines, and that they own to the river and they thought they had river frontage and they bought it and they closed and they didn't.
Oof.
So that would be one. It,
Okay.
and it keeps going, the stories do.
So in other words, you know all the ins and outs and ways you could potentially prevent some really big heartache.
Well, you just want someone that's experienced that can really try to cover all of the what ifs.
Okay. Um, can you talk about foreclosure properties and the types of foreclosures you might see?
Um, Back during the recession, the type of foreclosures we saw, because we're not seeing many right now, doesn't mean that they won't come up again, of course. But we would just see um, really nice homes, uh, farms. Sometimes you see if it's elder has passed away and there's no children and it just became dilapidated, and you might see a farm and then you would have to like have a title search done on what are all the liens against the property and have an attorney make sure that's all cleared up.
Got
You
it.
could go to the local lenders and say, hey, do you have any foreclosures? They might know
Oh,
of some.
so those might not be listed, but they might still be out there.
Yes. Hmm.
Oh, wow. Excellent. Um, what about like proactively, like if you see a farm that you really love, would it ever make sense either for the realtor or for you to write a letter and say, if you're ever interested in selling it, I'd love to to talk with you? Is that like a bother to the homeowners?
I've seen it work better with agents doing it, but maybe it's
Okay.
because I do a lot of them.
Okay.
I've seen some buyers do it, and then they usually come over to me, and but not a lot of buyers will get the call for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but I
Uh-huh.
don't say it's a bad thing.
And so why do you think it works when, like, not why it works for you, but why would a farm owner potentially be open to that kind of letter from you? Like, are they just waiting to sell, or is it just like, wow, this might prompt me to make some life decisions?
I think usually that I put with it something that they can relate to, maybe a neighboring property or something that I've sold that they might be aware of that, sold for a nice value and they've been
Yep.
curious. And, that curiosity comes to, okay, what is the real price? Because a buyer couldn't give them a price.
Oh, okay. Got
So
it.
in that instance,
Got it. We have a question. Can you talk about buying multiple adjacent parcels from a single owner? Is there something special to know? Can they not can they not just combine it for some reason?
well, you can buy them all together and the purchase contract can have each parcel number on it.
Okay.
You wouldn't want them all consolidated into one. And the reason is that might take away some of your building rights or other options. So if there's a reason to survey it, to put it all into one, it should be a really good reason. Otherwise, or something that pertains to what you're trying to build there. But
Got it.
otherwise, definitely buy all the parcels. You can do it in one contract, but list all the parcel numbers and the acreages on each.
Got it. And then one of the other realities, I know one of the farm couples that came from our incubator program, it took them like 4 years to find the right property in the Pecatonica area. And one of the things that kind of surprised them was they had the perfect property, but they kind of had to adjust to their rural neighbors, many of whom were probably a little bit more conservative politically. Can you say something, just general advice, if you're a suburbanite or a city person moving to the country, any tips on kind of just adjusting to that?
Well, manure spreading happens. And if you want, I would go over and I would meet your neighbors, tell them who you are. They're going to ask a lot of direct questions, which you might find a bit offensive. You
Like
know,
how direct?
pardon.
Like how direct?
You know, where did you come from? Why did you move here? And they're curious.
Yep.
And they may not be warm at first because you might be deemed the outsider, but it's amazing how it comes around, and great partnerships, especially if you own a tractor.
Got it. And what about, you said you had a story about someone backing up driveways.
Oh, well, I had a friend of a friend that I helped relocate into Amish country, and he built up a beautiful horse ranch eventually, and we looked for a very long time for this property. Um, and there was a farmer that spun up the driveway in reverse, and I'm not quite sure why, but he got out, kept the car door open, kept the car running as he stood there talking to him for an hour, and asked them every question possible. Why would they buy expensive horses on down the line? And they laughed and felt like they couldn't make it up. And because it was so away from the world where he came from. So it was really cute. So you
Excellent.
do you do find the eccentric people that are out there, and I have a neighbor just down the road, and he doesn't like the government, so he makes his property look terrible by having debris, old farm machinery all over there, and asks anyone and everyone to drop some off at his property because he feels it'll lessen the value. So
um, we have a question, concerns and considerations for clearing trees. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but um, like, Jim, do you want to clarify that? Or can someone clarify that? Any other, by the way, while we're waiting for that clarification, any other tips? Where I think we've done really well. We're going to move over to Paul pretty soon. Any last tips or considerations?
just one thing about assessment versus appraisal.
Yeah,
These are two
great.
words that are interchanged consistently with most people that aren't in the trade, and which is
Yep.
fine. An assessment is something that the taxpayer says that they define how much you should pay in taxes. An appraisal is the market value. It is not on your tax bill. It has nothing to do with your assessment. If you have
Okay.
a newer property, the assessment's going to be closer to the appraisal. If you have an older property, that assessment really means nothing. If you buy that house for more money than that assessment, which is very normal, your taxes will eventually will go up and catch up with the purchase price.
Got it. All right. So we will have a chance to ask more questions of Deanna at the end when we do the general Q&A. Deanna, this has been super helpful. As someone already said, which I agree, you did a great job of explaining things very clearly. So thank you so much for that, Deanna. That was really, really good.
Thank you.
All right. So next we're going to move on to Paul. And I'm just going to introduce Paul briefly. Paul Dietman is a senior lending specialist on the diversified markets team at Compeer Financial, a member-owned rural lending cooperative and farm credit system institution. Paul and his colleague Sai Tao are responsible for Compeer's Emerging Markets Loan Program, which provides loans and technical assistance to farmers who market their products through local food systems. Dietman holds a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Economics from the University of Illinois and a master's degree from UW-Madison. He is the co-author of the books Fearless Farm Finances, Farm Financial Management Demystified, and Financial Risk Management for Specialty Crop and Farmers. I know Paul has helped a million different farmers think through their finances and make some really wise choices. And I know he has a special affinity and desire to help them out. Paul, just to get you started, before you get talking about farm lending, I saw you went to college here in Illinois, but you've really spent most of your life in Wisconsin since then. Is there anything we can do negotiating wise to get you back in Illinois?
Yeah, I moved up here. I graduated from the University of Illinois at the height of the farm crisis, and I moved to Wisconsin. I never wanted to live in Wisconsin. I wanted to stay in Illinois, and so I moved to Wisconsin with the intention of only staying here 2 years and waiting for the farm economy to turn and then go back south of the border. But yeah, I kind of got stuck here.
So, Paul, why don't you take it away, and you can share your screen.
Okay. Well, thanks, Nathan. Good to follow Deanna, who we've been friends for many, many years at this point. All right, there we go. So as Nathan said, I'm Paul Dittman. I'm with Compeer Financial, which is a farmer-owned cooperative. We're part of the National Farm Credit System, and the Farm Credit System is the main lender to farmers in the country. Overall, we hold about 40% of all the farm debt in the country. Within our territory with Compeer, we're actually more like 45% of all the farm debt. So our territory is northern Illinois, about 2/3 of Wisconsin, and the eastern half of Minnesota. So I co-lead the Emerging Markets Loan Program, as Nathan said, and it's a loan program that's for farmers who market their products directly to consumers or who are engaged in some sort of value-added agriculture, whether it's value-added production or processing or marketing. We have a microloan under that program that goes up to $75,000. It's mainly for operating and for equipment, things like that, small buildings. We actually can do real estate under the microloan program. We have kind of an easy underwriting process. Basically, Compeer was formed by the merger of 3 different farm credit cooperatives, and I was with Badgerland Financial, which was the southern part of Wisconsin, excuse me. We merged with First Farm Credit in northern Illinois, and then AgStar, which was in Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. When we merged, they carved out a pool of capital and let Cy and myself create this program around that pool of capital. And so that's what the Emerging Markets Loan Program is. And it's very much targeted to people who are operating in local food systems. To do business with us, you have to be what we consider to be a bona fide farmer. And a bona fide farmer in our language is someone who owns agricultural assets or who's engaged in agricultural production. So you could be a renter and still be considered a bona fide farmer. You have to have the ability to produce $500 a year of agricultural products. So you can be a very small farmer, still can be considered to be a bona fide farmer. You don't have to be a rural farmer. You can be an urban farmer, a suburban farmer, and we can work with you under our loan programs. So that's kind of what I do here. We do a lot of loans, a lot of real estate loans, a lot of equipment loans and things like that. So wanted to just talk a little bit about the financing process. So how do you go about financing real estate, farm real estate? The first thing I think that we need to consider is the fact that farm loans are a commercial loan. They're not a consumer loan. And I know there was a question that came up about, someone said that the lender they talked to said that if the farmland was worth more than the house, they couldn't finance it. In my program, it's just the opposite. If the house is worth more than the farmland, I can't finance it. I don't do consumer lending. I only do farm loans. So in my world, if the land is worth more than the house, I can do the loan, but it's a commercial loan. Commercial loans can't be sold on the secondary market, and I think more than 90% of consumer home loans are sold on the secondary market to either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. You might not even know that your loan's been sold to them. It's still serviced locally by your local bank. But because those loans are being sold in the secondary market and they're passing the risk off to the secondary market, that's why on a consumer home loan, you can get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. With a farm loan, a lot of banks and credit unions won't finance farms. They don't do those sorts of commercial loans. Most banks that do those sorts of loans are only going to offer a 3 or a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage because they can't pass the risk off. They're holding those loans in-house. With our institution, we hold the loans in-house too, but we can still do a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And that's really kind of the reason that we finance so many farms across the country, because we're about the only one who could do that. As a cooperative, we're actually a government sponsored entity like Freddie and Fannie, although we don't have any government money in our system. Because these are commercial loans, the interest rates are typically higher, and they're typically 1 to 1.5% higher than on a consumer home loan. So if you're hearing 30-year fixed rate mortgages on homes being quoted at 3%, we're going to be at 4 or 4.5%. And again, it's a commercial loan. It's considered to be commercial loans generally are considered to be a little bit riskier because if you get into financial trouble, you're not going to let your home go, but you might let a commercial property go, like a farm. You may let it go back to the bank. So that's kind of why interest rates are higher. First question that comes up, usually when I'm talking to a beginning farmer who's just starting to think about buying a farm, and they're just starting to look for a farm, but they want to know, how much farmland can I afford? They don't want waste their time or waste the realtor's time going out looking at a farm that's the asking price is $1 million if they've only got the ability to finance 500,000. And so they'll come in with that question. Again, because these are commercial loans and not consumer loans, we use different underwriting standards. You know, if you're getting a consumer home loan, it's very standard to use these ratios. Maximum PITI is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So what's the home mortgage going to cost you? A lender doesn't want to see that be more than 28% of your gross income, gross household income per year. And then TAO is total annual obligations. So that's where we add in car loans and credit card debt and student loans and all those things. And we don't want more than 36% of your gross household income being committed to those monthly loan payments. On the farm side, we look at cash available to the farm, and we want that to be 115% of all of the demands on the farm's available cash. And when we look at the cash that's available to the farm, it's from the farm itself, it's from non-farm sources, jobs, it can be from government payments, things like that. So we look at all the cash that's available to the farm, and then we look at all the demands on the farm's available cash. And it's the operating expenses for the farm, it's family living costs, it's tax liabilities, it's debt service. But then we also bring in replacement of depreciating stuff. So all that stuff that's rusting and rotting on the farm, the equipment and the buildings and things. We want to make sure that there's enough cash coming through the farm operation that you've got money to replace that stuff as it wears out. And then we also want to see you be able to build working capital reserves, so a rainy day fund. So we tend to take a pretty conservative view of cash flow. When someone asks me this question, how much farmland can I afford? What I'm doing is going back and I'm running these cash flow ratios and figuring out what's the most that you could possibly take on and still be able to adequately cover your family living expenses, for example, all that sort of stuff. We don't really, I know that the comment came up earlier about pre-qualification, and we don't really have a process of pre-qualification like you would on a home. I go through this with my customers and I'll tell them, give them kind of a dollar amount. Here's the range that you should be looking at for a farm. But I don't really have a process for doing a pre-qualification or a pre-approval. And a lot of times on a farm, that's not required. It's becoming more common. I never used to run into it at all, but I've been running into situations lately where realtors don't want to even show property unless the buyer has been pre-qualified. So from how much can I afford, the next question is how much can I finance? And I know a question came up in the chat, why is the down payment so much higher on farmland than it is on a home loan? And again, because most lenders are passing the risk on those home loans off to the secondary market. That's part of the reason why the down payment is typically higher. Another thing is we don't typically require, I forget what you call it, the insurance that you have to buy if you don't come up with a 20% down payment. We don't do that. We don't mess with that. So typical conventional financing will be 60 to 70% of the appraised value of the property, which means that you're going to have to come up with a down payment of 30 to 40% in general. We have a beginning farmer program under Compeer, and I serve on that committee too as part of my role. And under that program, we wrote underwriting standards that allow us to go up to 85% of the appraised value on the property, depending on the size of the loan and the credit worthiness of the borrower. So generally, the smaller the loan, the higher percentage we can finance of the purchase. We can even go up as high as 90% if we've got a USDA Farm Service Agency guarantee on the loan. So we try to make it really easy for beginning farmers to buy into their first farm, as they're getting started. In a lot of cases, we're partnering with the USDA's Farm Service Agency Beginning Farmer Down Payment Program, which is a really excellent program. This came out, it's probably been out 15 years or so. We always refer to it as the 54550 program. The beginning farmer has to come up with a 5% down payment under this program. FSA will finance 45% of the purchase at 1.5% fixed interest rate for 20 years, which is a fantastic deal. And then we'll do 50% financing, or we finance 50% of the purchase it's a conventional financing. It's on a 30-year fixed rate note though. Under this program, there's a lot of advantages. There's FSA will cover the cost of the appraisal, which on a farm could be $2,500, $3,000. You know, the appraisal cost is relatively high on farmland, but FSA picks up the cost under the program. They'll also, if I ask for a loan guarantee on our loan under this program, they'll waive their normal guarantee fee, which ordinarily the guarantee fee is 1.5% of the loan amount. So that's a really significant cost savings. And with that guarantee, I can discount our interest rate by 50 basis points, so 0.5%, and lock it for 30 years. So it's a really great program. This program, though, you have to have at least 2 or 3 years of farming experience and not more than 10. And you have to be able to show that you've had some farm management experience. So you've actually managed aspects of a farm operation. So that's a little bit of a hurdle that you have to jump to get into this program, but I use the program a lot. I love working with FSA. They're easy to work with, at least here in Wisconsin, and the program is just fantastic.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
We have a question. Are your beginning farmer criteria of the borrower the same as FSA's?
Ours is not. Well, I shouldn't say it's not completely. We want to see someone who's got less than 10 years farming experience, but we don't have that minimum 2 or 3 years of farming experience that FSA would have for this particular program, you know.
Okay. Okay, good.
So what's a lender going to ask for you when you're applying for a loan? We're going to ask for a current balance sheet or a personal financial statement. So that's just a listing of everything that you own, all of your assets, and everything you owe, which is all of your liabilities. We're going to ask for 3 years of federal tax returns. Even if you're not farming, we want to see 3 years of federal tax returns just to kind of see what your historic earnings have been. We're going to want to see a projected profit and loss or a projected cash flow for a year going forward. So after you buy the farm, what's your cash flow going to look like? And then we want to see a very simple business plan. And it's very simple. I've got a little template that I put together for my borrowers. It just results in a 1 to 2 page business plan. Just kind of high level. Here's what we're planning to grow. Here's how we plan to market it. Here's the partners that we use. We have an attorney, we have an accountant, you know, all those sorts of things. So it's a very, very simple business plan.
By the way, Paul, we have another question.
Sure. Yeah.
Does farming experience in another country count?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, we would consider that. Awesome. And and again, we don't actually have a farming experience requirement. You know, it's, I loan money to beginning farmers all the time who are buying their first farm. Maybe they have never farmed, or I'm making loans under a microloan program to someone who's just getting started farming, and they don't want to burn through all their cash, or they don't want to finance with credit cards and things like that, which is pretty typical in the world that we work in.
But you were saying that the FSA program does require at least a few years.
Yeah, under that beginning farmer down payment program, they have that 2 or 3 year requirement. I keep saying 2 or 3 years. It's technically 3 years, but you can replace one of the 3 years with management of another business, or with a college degree, or military service. I mean, there's different ways that you can reduce that requirement to just 2 years.
Okay, and I hope you don't mind me jumping in with just a few
more.
No,
go ahead.
One question is,
I don't have any more slides, so I wanted to keep it relatively simple, leave time for questions. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, Nathan.
For the P&L requirements, how many years do you expect the farmer to take to be cash flow positive?
Well, we'd like to see it cash flow positive at the end of the first year. It's not always possible, but again, we're not just looking at the farm. You know, we're looking at non-farm sources as well. So, and a lot of my farmers are farming part-time, or it's 2 partners, 1 partner's on the farm, 1 partner's off the farm, and we're looking at more of a global cash flow. So we're looking at income from all sources and that sort of thing.
Okay, there's another question. Are there any perks to a new farmer leasing from an incubator farm before taking the jump to a larger farm?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's a great way to get started. Yeah, if you can get into an incubator farm where the cost of the land is rental cost is relatively low, and they've got infrastructure like you do at Liberty Prairie. I mean, you've got greenhouse space. I think you've got a pack shed and things like that. I mean, that's fantastic. If you don't have to take on that kind of capital debt as you're getting started farming, that's ideal. Gives you a chance to kind of get your growing systems set up, build your markets, build relationships with other farmers. Yeah, I mean, it really gives you a head start. You want to go out and buy a farm right away and take on a huge amount of capital debt, and then you're constantly trying to service that debt. So leasing is a great way to get started.
And does that also make that farmers' loan requests more likely to be approved because they've shown that they already have more of a track record?
Yeah, it definitely helps. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great.
Yeah. A few considerations as you're searching for a farm. Number one, and this comes up a lot with beginning farmers, especially with that beginning farmer down payment program, the 54550 program. It's really difficult to finance remodeling or improvements. So if you're looking at buying land or a farmette and it's got a house that's sort of a wreck, and you aren't in a position to do the work yourself, Deanna talked about sweat equity. If you can do it yourself at relatively low cost, that's a different story, but it's really difficult to finance those things. Especially under that 54550 program, you're 95% leveraged under that program. You have only 5% equity in the property. You got nothing to borrow against when you want to remodel the house, right? So yeah, I run into this relatively often. I just had this come up here about 3 months ago. I financed a farm for a young Amish farmer, and now he's ready to build a house on the farm. And I told him initially, when we financed the farm, I said, I'm not going to be able to do anything on the construction of the home. And it's particularly hard if you're doing your own construction. And of course, in the Amish community, they typically do their own construction because the construction loan process is really involved, and you have to get bids on every part of the project. Even if you're going to do the work yourself, you have to go out and get bids on everything and put it all into what's known as a sworn statement that says, okay, the electrical is going to cost this, or the plumbing is going to be this, or the concrete X dollar amount. So it's just really difficult to finance remodeling or improvements. That's where, like Deanna said, if you've got the ability to come in and put the sweat equity into it, or if you've saved up enough that you use the 54550 program, you only had to take 5% or only put 5% of your own cash into the deal, and then you've reserved 50,000 that you can then put into the remodeling. That's the ideal situation. But to come back and say, okay, well, now I want to build a house, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm just not going to be able to. So another consideration, and this came up during your conversation with Deanna too, and is the area supportive of your segment of agriculture. And so when you're out looking for a property, where do you want to land? If you're someone who's operating a CSA and you're in the middle of corn and soybean country, and you're kind of looked at as an outsider and nobody wants to help you with anything, and you're feeling really isolated, that's not the ideal place to be. I had a conversation a couple months ago with a farmer. She's on her third farm. She's an older woman, and she said all 3 of her farms she thought were going to be her forever farm. But she said, I bought my first farm, and I was in a neighborhood. I was the only woman-owned farm in the neighborhood, and everyone else was so condescending to me, and I had no friends in the neighborhood. And she said, I was so isolated that I got depressed. And she finally sold the farm, bought another farm, kind of ran into the same situation. Now she landed in a neighborhood. There's a really good group south of Madison, kind of between Madison, Wisconsin, and the Illinois border. And they're called the Soil Sisters. And it's all women-owned farms, women-owned small businesses. They're very supportive of each other. They not just moral support, they financially support each other. They do co-marketing. It's just such a supportive community, and that's where she's landed now. And now she is in her forever farm because she really found the place where she fits. and it's wonderful. But you have to be cognizant of that. You don't want to just go and buy a farm in some area because it's cheap, and then you find out, I don't like living here, and I don't like the people that are my neighbors, and we don't have anything in common, and and all my friends are 100 miles away.
Yep.
Another consideration is, what's the potential for off-farm employment if you need it? And there's, especially the segment that I work in, where a lot of folks are growing vegetables, and they may have some downtime in the middle of winter and may have a need to generate a bit more cash flow, and they find some part-time off-farm employment for some months of the year. So you want to kind of think about that as you're scoping out a place to land. Is there potential for off-farm employment? What's the distance to your markets? What's the proximity to your support services? I've worked with a number of dairy goat operations, and Wisconsin has the largest number of dairy goat operations of any state in the country. Even so, there isn't a lot of support services for dairy goat operations. There's a couple of veterinarians that specialize in dairy goats, but they're located in the southern part of the state. So if you're in you want to run a dairy goat operation, you don't want to be located in far northern Wisconsin, where there's nobody who knows anything about feed or about veterinary services or anything that relates to the dairy goat business. I think this is actually my last slide, Nathan, so then we can open up for any questions. Sure. or discussion. Yep. Just wanted to talk a little bit about, so let's say right now you're thinking about buying a farm 2 or 3 years or 4 years down the road. What can you do right now to kind of get yourself prepared for that farm purchase? Number one is building and maintaining a FICO score of 670 or above. So that's your credit score. That's 670 is sort of our minimum score. It's not I say sort of, it's not a hard and fast minimum score. We have a couple different ways that we can underwrite a loan transaction. We have something we call scorecard, which is a really quick, simple, easy way to underwrite. If you've got a 670 or above credit score, I can run it through scorecard. I could give you an answer probably tomorrow. If you've got a credit score below 670 or no credit score, I have a lot of Amish farmers in my portfolio. A lot of them have a 0 credit score. They just don't have any history with installment debt, right? So we have to go through more traditional underwriting for that kind of a process, and it takes a couple weeks. It's not the end of the world, but if you've got a credit score in the low 600s or in the 500s, there probably is not going to be an option to finance a farm purchase. So getting that credit score up to about a 670 or above is really critical. Pay down credit cards. Credit card debt is a major red flag for a lender. It's all considered short-term debt. It destroys your working capital. So credit card debt, major red flag. Pay it off as quickly as you can, and don't play the game of rolling one credit card at a 0% interest teaser rate over to the next card that has a 0% teaser rate. It's still debt, and it's still short-term debt. So pay down credit cards. Student loan debt, I don't run into it very often, but I do occasionally run into student loan debt that is a major problem when it comes to making a loan. I actually just made a loan this past week under the microloan program. It's the farmer he's a bit older, and he's only been farming for about a year. He's got 3 daughters. They all went to college. He and his wife co-signed their student loans. It's over $150,000 of student loans that this farmer and his wife have co-signed on, that all lands on their credit report, that all lands on their balance sheet. And when I calculate equity, it hits their equity position. Now under a microloan, because we have easier underwriting, I can kind of push that aside for the time being because it's a small loan. But he bought his farm on a land contract that at some point is going to have to be paid off. It's good about 5 years from now, he's going to have to pay off the land contract. I'm going to want to finance that for him, but we got to work that student loan down or student loan debt down within the next 5 years for us to get to the equity position that he needs to be at for us to take it on. File a Schedule F, which is profit or loss from farming. So that's on your federal tax return, Schedule F. File it as soon as you can. As soon as you've got any farm income. If you're farming on a 1/4 acre in the city of Chicago, file a Schedule F. and make sure that you're showing that you've got farm income. Because when it comes time to buy a farm, and we want to use that 54550 program with FSA, if you can produce a Schedule F from the year 2021, and then another one for 2022, another one for 2023, you've got your 3 years of farm management experience. Very easy to establish. So be sure to file a Schedule F as soon as you can. There's also some advantages to filing a Schedule F. Farmers have a lot of tax advantages that non-farmers don't have. You have accelerated depreciation under Section 179. I mean, there's all sorts of different things that you can do as a farmer to minimize your tax liability. So file a Schedule F as soon as you can. File taxes. I should say that too. I'm working on a loan application right now for a guy. He's sort of an anti-government sort, you know, and he's had different business entities. He's always been farming, but he's had different farm business names, hasn't filed taxes for the last couple of years, and now it's time to buy a farm. He talked to FSA. FSA is saying without Schedule F, without tax returns at all, we're done. I mean, we can't help you with tax evasion, you know, so we're not going to finance that for you. And now he's coming to me and saying, well, can you finance it for me? And I'm saying, okay, well, go find somebody who's got tax returns. You know, if it's your dad, if it's your uncle, if it's your grandpa, somebody's going to have to be a co-borrower because you basically have no credit worthiness when you have no tax returns. So it isn't the end of the world, but it's going to take a lot of work for us to get it done. We'll try. I can't promise them anything, but so make sure you file Schedule F and file taxes. Build up cash reserves. You know, you can never have too much cash. And again, if you run into that situation where you find the perfect farm, but it needs a lot of work and it's going to cost some money to fix it up, you can still use the 54550 program and have a pot of cash off to the side that you can use to then fix up the buildings. Possibly take a small farm loan now to begin building a commercial credit history. And we're doing that in our microloan program. You know, we can make loans as small as $5,000 under that program. And by bringing somebody in and kind of helping them get a small loan, and then we do a lot of business planning with them and cash flow monitoring and analysis, and help them understand their balance sheet. Well, the gentleman I just talked about, you know, I mean, we bring him in, he's taken a small loan under the microloan program, and then I can work with him over the next 5 years to get him to the point where he can then pay off that land contract, or we can pay off the land contract, refinance it. So doing that, and then lease to own can be an excellent way to go. And it's kind of exciting. I know, like the Conservation Fund, there's other organizations, Iroquois Valley, which I know, Nathan, you're very familiar with, that are they're buying land and then they're leasing it to beginning farmers with an option to purchase at some point when the cash flow makes sense. That's a really great way to go, you know. And financing on a land contract is not a bad idea either, although it can make some other things a little bit more challenging, but a lot of times the terms are better than what I can offer. So that's what I've got. Happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Good. I'm going to do a few questions, and I want to make sure we get some time for Andy too. We have a question. Are the loan programs you discussed just talking about the land, or is it also talking about other farm needs and starting up, like a greenhouse, equipment, et cetera?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah, we finance a lot of greenhouse equipment loans. We do operating loans, revolving lines of credit. Yeah, we can do all sorts of different things. And sometimes even under our microloan program, I've financed some buildings under the microloan program, even though technically if we finance a building, we're supposed to have a mortgage on the property because we need to have security interest in the land under the building. But if it's a smaller building, we can sometimes do things like take equipment as collateral or take livestock as collateral.
Okay, so could you do a loan that combined funding for buying a land with also installing a greenhouse or something?
Yeah, sometimes we can. Yeah, and sometimes we'll do, you know, we might do a loan under the microloan program first before we close the real estate transaction. Once you have a total obligation with us over that's over $75,000, then I can't use the microloan program anymore. And so I've done that where we've sort of staged the loan transaction in a way, you know.
Okay. We have a question. Does the amount of federal taxes owed affect the amount of loan one can qualify for?
It does to some extent. We will look at it. You may have 3 years of tax returns and you had strong non-farm income that whole time. And so you had a lot of tax liability. But now you're going to start farming. And you look at going forward a year or two as you're establishing your farm, maybe you don't have a lot to sell. Maybe you've got a lot of depreciation that's going to offset your tax liability. We take all that into consideration.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Are there any disadvantages to the 54550 program? It seems to me with that little down payment amount, your payments would be higher for 30 years rather than if you put up a bigger payment. Are there any other big disadvantages?
Yeah, that can be a disadvantage. And the FSA portion is on a 20-year fixed rate. So it's a little bit more accelerated payment schedule. FSA, for whatever reason, I've never quite understood this, but they like an annual payment, and that annual payment is in December under this 54550 program. On our side, we could do an annual payment, we could do a monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, we try to line it up with the farm's cash flow. So that's another bit of a disadvantage.
Okay.
Otherwise, there's not a lot of disadvantages to using that program. Financing with FSA in general is pretty good. The downside, like if you do 100% financing with FSA, that's the only place where maybe there's a bit of a disadvantage. They take a blanket lien on everything on the farm. So they take security interest in the real estate, in all of the equipment, in the livestock, and the blanket lien is in perpetuity. So it's as you accumulate more assets, they all become part of that blanket lien. And so when I've had people who've got an FSA loan as their primary loan come to me and they want to finance a piece of equipment, we have to do what's called a purchase money security interest. So we're paying for that piece of equipment directly to the dealer or directly to the seller so that we can get clear security interest on that one piece of equipment and keep it out of that FSA blanket lien. So that's about the only disadvantage to FSA. Otherwise, and there's more paperwork. I mean, our side, the paperwork's relatively simple, but FSA has a lot more paperwork. But yeah, it's not bad.
Okay, so I'm gonna do one more question. There's a lot more, but I want to make sure we get time for any. This is the last one, and we can get back to those questions for Paul at the end. Does your starting farmer loan work if it's not going to be your primary residence? Also, if you already have an FSA loan, will your starting farmer loan qualify for a second farm?
Ours will, and we can work with someone even if the farm isn't their primary residence. That's not an issue, as long as it's being used for farming purposes. If it's being used for hunting, that's considered consumer. So then that takes it out of my world. But
got it.
But yeah, as long as it's a farm, an operating farm, even a small operating farm doesn't matter. As long as it's an operating farm, we can do it.
Okay. And if you already have an FSA loan, could you qualify for the starting farmer loan for a second farm?
For that 54550 loan?
I guess so.
I think that's the question.
I think so.
They've got some rules about the amount of land that you already own in relation to the average size of a farm in the county. I ran into that earlier this year where I had a young farmer. I actually refinanced their farm loan. They were with a bank. I refinanced the farm loan. Now they're buying some land from a neighbor. And to me, they would have been perfect candidates for the 54550 program, but they own too much land already.
Okay.
And so that booted them out of the program. We're still going to do a guarantee on that because I can discount the interest rate for 30 years. They're going to have to pay the guarantee fee, that 1.5% fee. So.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. We're going to come back to you and Deanna and Andy at the very end for more questions, but I want to move on to Andy. Let me just read an introduction. Andy Wiedner is a certified general real estate appraiser based in Sycamore, Illinois. For over a decade, Andy has served the northeastern portion of the state, which includes the Chicagoland market. Over this time, Andy has completed appraisals on a wide variety of property types, including tillable farmland, recreational tracts, rural home sites, dairy production facilities, swine barns, cattle finishing operations, and wholesale greenhouse complexes. In addition to Andy's commitment to the real estate appraisal profession, he also serves as the sales team lead for Compeer Financial's appraisal department, while managing staff located throughout the northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin territories. Andy lives in Harvard, Illinois, with his wife and daughters, and enjoys working on his family's row crop farm in his spare time. So, Andy, thank you so much for being willing to talk about appraisals and some of the other financial factors underlying farmland properties. Andy, I know you are super busy, so I super appreciate you being willing to carve out some time for us as well.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy to be with you all. Thank you, Nathan, for the invitation. I've got to say, the two speakers that preceded me, fantastic information. I'm sure if you've had the opportunity to write down what they're saying, there's a lot of takeaways in what they've provided. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has been touched on to some capacity. So hopefully I can cement some of these ideas into our listening audience and they can carry that forward. So I will try to share my presentation with you all, get this started. Okay. So thanks for bearing with me. As Nathan said, my name is Andy Widener. I am based in Sycamore, Illinois, which is located in northeastern Illinois. I basically serve the collar counties around Chicago. And, as described, I have a wide variety of experience because of the region that we live in. There's obviously a lot of tillable farmland, throughout northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin. And those are predominantly the property types that I do encounter. But I have done appraisals on recreational and wooded properties, as well as rural home sites or farmettes that Deanna spoke on earlier, and as well as a lot of specialized facilities as well. I'm at heart a farmer, just like a lot of the listening audience. My family's farm is located in Harvard, Illinois, which if you took I-90 out of Chicago and then turned north on Route 23, you would see our Widener Farm sign. We farm corn and soybeans. We practice a lot of no-till and minimal tillage practices. If you're driving by on Route 23, you may even see our team mascot, Libby, running through the grass. A lot of what I want to talk about today is to give you all some insight into what appraiser lingo is, because there's a lot of confusion, when I'm speaking with clients around what an appraisal is, an appraiser, and so on. I want to touch briefly on the changes that we've observed in land values, specifically in Illinois in the past year, and then do a touch at least on some of the rural residential aspects, which include our farmettes and hobby farms as well. So, when asked what is an appraiser, it's someone who performs evaluation service competently in a manner that is three things here: independent, impartial, and objective. So it's very important that you have someone that's unbiased, truly removed from the situation, and obviously licensed. Every real estate appraiser has either a residential or a certified general real estate appraisal license, at least in Illinois. When asked what is an appraisal, then, well, it's very simple. It's an opinion of value, and an appraisal can be delivered verbally. It can be communicated this way. Most of the time, though, it's delivered, through a written report. Obviously, hard copy, PDF makes no difference, but that's most of the time the way it's being delivered to my clients. And there's really a wide variety of services that we provide, as an appraiser. When I'm asked, a lot of times my intended user, my client, is Compeer Financial, and the use of those appraisals are for lending purposes. But oftentimes I'm also asked by outside clients to do an appraisal to help settle a family's estate. Oftentimes it's to help establish a purchase price or make a selling decision. So really, there's a lot of different scenarios where an appraisal could be of use. As Deanna touched on just earlier in her presentation, the there are some real differences between an appraisal and an assessment, and it really comes down to the definition of value and the use. So an appraisal in most cases determines the market value for a specific property at a specific time, within a specific time period at least. Whereas an assessment, it really relies on its use value. It's for real estate tax purposes. And oftentimes it's not even addressed maybe once every 4 years. And a lot of times it's one of those, they typically set it and forget it, unless there may be a sale involved. And here in Illinois, at least, there's 4 different categories that property is kind of classified into when it comes to assessments. And those 4 categories are farmland, non-farmland, a farm building, and a non-farm building. So what I have pictured here is actually a property that's just north of our home farm, right on Route 23. And it consists of roughly 5 acres. There's a house, an older barn, a machine shed, and what you can see there in the photo on the right side, the property classifications as far as what components are what. Well, the non-farm building would be the house, and a lot of times the detached garage or attached garage would be included in that. So when you're understanding and looking at your real estate tax assessments, what you want to kind of framework in your mind is that, okay, the non-farm building would be the house specifically. The farm building would be all of those improvements that are not the house or the garage. So in this case, it would be the machine shed and the barn. And the non-farmland is generally the property that's not being used for ag purposes. So in this scenario, you can see there's a nicely mowed yard. That would be included as part of the non-farmland, whereas everything that's tilled, the land that kind of encircles the building site, that would be classified as the farmland purely. Kind of shifting gears to understanding land values and the way that Illinois classifies soils. It's based on a definition that it's very standardized and is produced by the University of Illinois. It's based on what's called the Productivity Index, or the PI for short. And these basically classify land into 4 different categories, and those would be class A, B, C, and D soil types. Our class A property types are those that are the most productive. Here in Illinois, you can, and generally farmers talk about corn and soybean yields, which you'd expect on a class A farm here in Northern Illinois would be somewhere around 200 bushels per acre in an average year. And who knows what an average year is anymore with weather conditions that we've observed through 2019 and the drought here through even 2021 this summer. But year in, year out, you can probably expect to see yields somewhere in that neighborhood, whereas class D soil types are probably going to yield somewhere around 100 to 120 bushels an acre. But those can vary widely. But regardless of what the soil classification is, there is a very high correlation between price paid and the soil class and productivity. So as the quality of soil increases, as the yields increase, as cash rents, that farmers are willing to pay increases, the intrinsic value of that property therefore is higher than something that's less. Here in Illinois, we do a really good job of tracking our land values, and shown here on the photo is basically a 20-year time frame of what land values have done over that course. And as you can see, farmland values around the year 2000 were on either side of $4,000 an acre. And when I just completed my most recent benchmark in DeKalb County, which is a Class A farm, that specific property appraised for over $11,000. So you can do some quick mental math and realize that farmland has been a fantastic investment over the past 20 years or so, and even beyond that. Looking at the 1-year change, though, there's been some significant increases in land values. Our cropland A or Class A farms have posted almost a 10% increase, coming in at 9% year over year, and our other Class B and C soils are posting similar increases. Some pretty staggering results in the last couple months across DeKalb County and LaSalle County. And these are for properties that range in size from roughly 80 acres up to 240 acres. At the low end, we're seeing very high quality land in DeKalb County selling for over $11,000 an acre. There was a specific farm near Waterman, 240 acres, which did include a building site, a house and small buildings, but that brought over $15,000 an acre. Another specific property in northern LaSalle County, only 15 miles or so from that Waterman farm, raw land, pure farmland, sold for over, again, $15,000 an acre, $15,500 an acre. So farmland purchasing is extremely competitive. It always has been over time, but it seems like the pressure is just mounting, similar to what's being experienced across our residential segments. Listing times are very, very short. A lot of times the broker will not even create, a flyer and start advertising. They make a few phone calls and the property's gone. So that really is telling of the market that we're currently in. And a lot of that is attributed to the recent run in corn and soybean prices over the past year. Up until recently, in the last couple of weeks, corn prices were somewhere in the $5 to $6 range. Soybean prices were approaching $15 a bushel, which was not historically record, but in the last 10 years, it certainly is. Just another graphic that kind of shows the heightened, the drastic increase, I guess, in land values that we're experiencing here in the past year. So, land that was averaging around $11,000 an acre and suddenly jumped to 12, 13, and in some cases even $14,000 an acre. I want to take just some time. I'm going to go dark for just a moment and talk about some of the rural aspects of rural housing. And the term rural has really seen a definition shift in when it comes to how real estate markets view properties. And while there's no distinctive characteristic that makes a property rural, in the past, the term may have been loosely tied to agricultural-based properties. So as you can kind of imagine in your mind, it's something that's somewhat out in the country. It typically has something more than 2 acres, certainly. Likely has some type of production land behind it or with it. Oftentimes has outbuildings. So some of also what's driven the market here as far as the rural residents is the fact that we have enhanced roadways, we have better interstate access and highways. But if you think about the rural infrastructure that's been put in place, especially with the advent of remote work, there's really been a significant increase in the demand for rural housing. When I talk about the segments, I guess some of the influences that to value across our rural housing market, as Deanna, she touched on earlier, it certainly comes down to the location, the access, the zoning, the style of those improvements, and then the site improvements as well. So there's when we talk about the location of the property, we want to be cognizant of the fact that the property is within a reasonable commuting distance to employment and communities. We talk about the quality and the style of construction, as well as the price of materials tend to be higher when looking at rural properties as opposed to maybe other suburban housing developments. Something that I know it hasn't been touched on yet is that when you're prospecting a specific rural property, you want to be aware of any surrounding land uses. So in recent experiences, I appraised a property. It was a house on small acreage that adjoined a quarry, and some of those aspects that may not come to mind immediately as you step on foot are that there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of traffic associated with that operating quarry, so that may be detrimental in some cases to that specific property. Another aspect is that there could be adjoining, like Deanna said, there could be manure spreading. So if you're adjoining a large hog facility or a dairy facility, there's going to be days where, that odor is it's very present. So you really have to be, looking at the property itself, but then looking beyond just that property at what else is around it. We talk about the access, the property's accessibility, ingress and egress are extremely important. But when it comes to rural properties, it could vary widely. It could be a highway access, it could be a public road. In some cases, it could even be just a documented cartway. It could be a dirt lane that runs up through the neighbor's, adjoining property through easement. So there's a lot of different ways that a property could be accessible. I know that the zoning is one aspect that I, as an appraiser, have to be very in tune with and understanding completely what's allowed and not allowed with that specific property. And occasionally a property owner may split acreage from a larger tract, which could have implications on the building eligibility of the remaining portion. I know in DeKalb County that they have fairly stringent regulations on what properties can and cannot be built on. Generally, the rule of thumb is that it has to, I think the requirement is that it has to have 40 acres and I think it's 330 feet of road frontage. So when, a 40-acre tract comes up, it may not track specifically to the farmland productivity. It may track more closely with the aspect that it's a developed or a buildable site. So those are aspects that you really have to be cognizant of. I'll touch just briefly on the style. One aspect that I'm seeing become, gaining in popularity is it's often referred to as the shome. It's a pole-built structure. It's a shouse. It's a shed house. It's an example that kind of comes to mind. They're unique in that they offer some of the cost savings on a per square foot basis compared to other conventional houses. But, again, it may not be terribly appealing to the general public. And oftentimes, a builder or someone that's building their house may get really hung up on the aspects that they really want to see, but it may not function or look or sound the way that the market perceives to be useful or that they find value in. And then the last category that I think is important to be aware of, which has been touched on, are thinking about the existing improvements, the site improvements that may be there. Those would be classified as, think of driveways or culverts, parking areas such as, gravel or if it's asphalt. There could be permanent plantings such as an apple orchard or other fruit trees. If there's electricity or water service, the well, depending on the capacity, there could be certain aspects that would limit a cattle operation if the well isn't sufficient to have enough water for the animals year in, year out. Those are all things that have to be addressed and kind of thought on before making those purchasing decisions. So the last slide that I have that I think would be of value to anyone that's listening tonight, I would encourage you to go to compeer.com, specifically our appraisal department tab, and sign up for our newsletter. It's something that we send out every month, and it gives us the ability to connect with our readers. We talk about recent land sales and industry trends that we're observing. It'll give you an opportunity to talk directly with an appraiser, specifically in your location. And I know, as Paul touched on, our department, it's spread across 3 different states. It's in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And we even have department members that are, out on the West Coast. So there really is a lot of people that are out there that are willing to talk to you. If you have questions, please reach out. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this point. Oh, Nathan, I'm having difficulty hearing right now. I'm wondering if.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Oh, there. Thank you. Yeah, I hope I wasn't rambling. I couldn't hear anything. I was going to.
No,
I'm sorry.
No. So what I want to do is, first of all, thank you so much. That was extremely helpful. I did have one question here for you. How would you find the productivity index for a property? Would the local county have that information?
So typically what I use a tool called AgriData, and it's a software system that has um, it has every soil that's out there. You can click on a map that shows you the field that'll give you the information as far as the soil types that exist. That information is not necessarily um, very easily accessible to the public. If you are interested, I would encourage going to the FSA, the local farm service agency. That's something that they can provide and kind of walk you through what the soil types actually indicate. Um, that'd be my best advice.
Okay. And then someone asked, could you drop the link to your newsletter sign up into the chat?
I can. Yep. Give me a moment and I can do that as we're talking.
Yep. Okay. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a few more questions. And if you asked a question early on in the session and I haven't asked it, feel free to re-enter it so I can see it again down here at the bottom of the feed. I'd like to take a few more questions, kind of formally bring this to an end. And then if our speakers are willing, maybe we could take a few more questions after that. We have a question here from Linda. Any advice for listed farms having huge dilapidated barns that either need to be torn down or are requiring a lot of money to rehab? I guess I might start with Deanna. Do you want to take a crack at that one? And then we can also maybe see if Paul or Andy have any advice.
So this would be a listing. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. A seller. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that most people, if it's dilapidated, they're okay with it. They want to make and ascertain if they can put it back to rights.
Okay.
But if it's, structurally just poor, maybe take it down.
Okay. So it kind of depends.
Yeah, sorry.
We have a question here. Actually, Paul, did you have any insights about that, or does that maybe not relate to you as much?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with Deanna on that. And it's hard to finance fix up of an old barn like that because a lot of times, and it's probably a question for Andy too, it doesn't add a lot of value to the farm, even if you fix it up. And there's not any grants available. That's people will say, well, isn't there a grant available to save an old barn? Beautiful barn. Yeah, but there isn't really any grant for that.
Andy, do you want to chip in on that?
Yeah, certainly. From the valuation aspect, all value is rooted in utility. And so the next user of that barn or the dilapidated building, even if it's brought up to its, when it was first built, it really calls into question, well, what's the use of that existing improvement once it's in place? And what you really wrestle with is the functionality of that building and the cost then that it takes to bring back. So, it certainly is a case-by-case question to answer, but generally those dollars are sunk and lost for good.
Good. Well, not good, but thanks for being direct.
Yeah.
Let's see, maybe a number of you could ask about this. I guess this relates in different ways. If you're growing row crops, does the ratio of cropland to wooded land affect the loan logic? And I guess that I'd also ask Andy after Paul answers about what the value of woods are in a property's value. So Paul, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, it really, the biggest impact is going to be on the appraised value. As far as cash flow, we can figure in cash flow from woods if there's timber that's ready to be harvested right now, but otherwise it's kind of hard to figure what the cash flow is going to be.
Okay. We have a question, or actually a statement from Michelle saying, this goes back to that barn question. If it needs to be taken down and there's no need for it, there are barn repurposes that may take it down for free as they sell the barn wood. That's really interesting. And I want to go back to you, Andy, about the wooded land. How does wooded land fit into the value of a property?
Certainly. So a lot of times you do see farms with a mixed use or a mixed land use, which would include tillable farmland and wooded land. And
Right.
what we try to do, oops, I just went dark. What we try to do is, you know, when we're looking for comparable properties, there's always that mixed land use, and there could be 10 acres of woods on one out of an 80-acre parcel, or a 50 acres of woods and out of an 80.
Yep.
And so what you're trying to do is get in the mindset of the buyer and understand where did they place that value. And so generally, you know, wooded land does contribute less than tillable land, and it's because of the income potential from that property type. You know, what I'm observing here in DeKalb County, properties that are purely recreational are purchased by the user. They're not used as income generating properties. And, you know, to each their own. So
Yep.
the market is typically indicating that tillable farmland is more valuable than wooded land.
Got it. We have a question, and I think I'm going to end the formal. Well, actually, I'll do this real quickly. Is it common to get more than one appraisal? And does the bank have their own appraiser? Andy, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. No, it's not uncommon to have more than one appraisal. I think Paul will be able to speak probably better than I can as to the reasoning or the rationale when that situation may occur. But it's certainly happened, you know, in my career where they have an existing appraisal for one lender and they put in a second request. And truly it's because the appraisal is an opinion of value. There is no scientific methodology behind that. So one appraiser may view one comparable list, whereas the other appraiser may have other aspects they're looking at.
Got it.
Yeah, it's pretty rare to see more than one appraisal on farmland. I mean, there's really not a good reason to do that, because once in a while I might have someone, they got an appraisal in order to make an offer to purchase on a piece of property. Then they come to me and they'll say, okay, well, can't we just use the same appraisal? No, we can't, because it's a different purpose, you know, and so different intended user. So we still end up having to do a second appraisal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
All
just
right,
adding extra cost.
Great, thank you. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to formally close it, and then Andy, Paul, and Deanna, if you're willing to stay in just a little longer in case there are any other questions, that'd be awesome. You've been very patient. So as I mentioned earlier, this is being recorded, and as soon as the recording is available as a YouTube video, we will send out a link to everyone so that you can use it and take more careful notes. I suspect that a lot of you are feeling like you've just been hit by a fire hose. There's just a lot of information coming at you very fast, so I hope that's helpful. We're also going to be sending you a link in that same email with a feedback survey. We hope that you'll respond. We always offer an incentive. So this time the incentive is if you send in your feedback survey by the deadline that we give you, the first 12 responders are going to get a free copy of Finding Good Farmland. Actually, it's going to be a random drawing, sorry, for 12. Finding Good Farmland, How to Evaluate and Acquire Land for Raising Crops and Animals. It's a nice little handbook with diagrams, and I think it lays out some of the things that would be super helpful for you to use. We just really recognize, I guess, that a lot of beginning farmers are looking for advice about buying farmland. So we plan to offer a few more webinars on related topics. We plan to have some farmers share their own experiences and tips from buying land of their own. And then we're also going to have on October 21st, Amy Collins and Emmy Brawley from the Conservation Fund to talk about farmland conservation easements and what farmers need to know about them, what farmland owners need to know about them, and some really interesting work that Emmy and Amy and the Conservation Fund are doing around using easements to make farmland more affordable for beginning farmers. So I think you'll want to check that out. We'll share information about that with you as well. You can stay tuned for more information about our activities and events by signing up for our email newsletter. Just go to illinoisfarmlink.org and you'll find the newsletter sign up down at the bottom right. We do offer free advising, by the way, for land access for farmers and landowners. So feel free to tap that too. again, we hope that this has been a really useful webinar. We are so grateful to Paul, Andy, and Deanna for taking time, doing multiple meetings with me and taking multiple emails from me and still being so cheerful as you see today. And we're just really grateful to all of them. They just volunteered their time just to really help out because they care about this topic. So with that, we formally end this program. You can take off, but if you'd like to ask a few more questions, we'll probably do about 10 more minutes and then we'll close things up for good. Thanks everyone, have a good night. So any more questions? We had some really nice comments. We had a question here from Jason. I would like to buy a retirement home on a wooded lot. What advantages are there to becoming a farmer or a forestry manager? Deanna, you want to start with that one? That's kind of an interesting topic.
Managed forest lands really reduce your taxes. So you have to, fulfill the requirements and, and it is work, but wow, do you have low taxes?
Like what kind of reduction in taxes are we talking about?
I'm just going to say wow, because I don't know for sure, but it's substantial.
And what, is it like a certification you have to get or inspection or like a forestry plan that you have to have in place to qualify for that?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Paul.
yeah, it's just a program here in Wisconsin. I don't know if they have it in Illinois or not, but it's offered through the Wisconsin DNR. And
Okay.
you have to have at least 15 contiguous acres of wooded land in order to be in the
Okay.
program. As Deanna said, it does reduce your taxes by a significant amount. It's more than a 50% reduction in property taxes.
Wow.
The flip side of that, though, is you do have to follow a forest management plan that includes a cutting schedule. And at the time of cutting, there's a stumpage tax that's assessed. And so they do get some of that back. I mean, you're saving a lot on property taxes over a long period of time, but then you're going to give some of it back when the timber sale happens. There's open managed forest and there's closed managed forest. Open managed forest really reduces your taxes. I mean, it could be a reduction of about 80%, but you're opening up your land for public use. So anybody can come in and hunt on your land without getting your permission if you've got open managed forest. If you've got it closed, the tax savings isn't quite as much. Most people close it though. They don't want just anybody traipsing around and shooting deer off the property.
Andy, do you know? Oh, go ahead, Deanna.
The open MFL, that hurts land values. So if I have like 40 acres, right away, buyers that are aware of it, they go, is it open or closed?
Got it.
Yeah,
Andy,
and there's a major penalty if you take land out of managed forest or you try to change it from open to closed. It's a major financial penalty.
Andy, do you know if Illinois has a similar program?
I'm not aware of anything, but again, that's because the territory that I serve has very little recreational and wooded properties. I believe, obviously out towards Joe Davies County, getting out toward Galena, there's a lot more hunting grounds that direction. But to be honest with you, I don't know if those same programs exist across state borders.
All right. We should find that out. Okay, excellent. Any other questions? I think we've done really well. Here's a great question. Obviously, as you mentioned, people are increasingly finding they can work remotely, and so they want to move to rural areas and enjoy rural landscapes, but they still want to be connected. The internet is key to being connected. How do you find out if internet would support personal or home business use? Like, how do you find out whether a particular property has good internet support, good internet coverage? I'd love to hear from Deanna first.
We ask the homeowner, and then if there's any doubt, it's just verified. And then other times I've had people set up in a house for a second showing, just to make sure that it was sufficient.
Wow.
But so otherwise they can verify with the companies.
Okay. So can you generally make an assessment saying like this particular township has great internet coverage and or is it just property by property?
Property by property, region by region, basically where the lines are running and the towers, etc.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's becoming so much better And it's such a big question. It used to be just a high-end question for business families. But now it's across the board with schools and things like that. So it is becoming much better. You can find it much more readily.
Andy, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I would agree with what Deanna said, that it's best to verify with the property owner. When I'm doing my inspections, those are questions I'll ask if I think it's pertinent to the valuation process. But there's only so many providers in that specific area, especially as you move west from where I'm located. So it would be in the buyer's best interest to verify to whatever extent they're comfortable with, and make sure that it suits their needs.
Got it. All right, I don't see any other questions. I guess, can I just ask for each of you, like, what's one last thought you want to share, or last story, or just whatever strikes your fancy? Maybe why don't we start with Deanna?
So first of all, Paul could talk about grants that, about taking care of invasive species and things, where there's more money to be obtained when you buy a farm. But have patience, get ready for a roller coaster, but find a good realtor and and persevere. You'll do great.
Yeah. Paul, next.
Yeah, actually, Deanna gave me a good lead there, because there are programs that farmers can take advantage of and they may not know about, especially beginning farmers. The program that Deanna was mentioning, it's a program that I signed up for on my own land, and it's a Wiffle Gap grant, Wisconsin Forest Land. I forget what the rest of the acronym is, but it's basically a Wisconsin Forest Land Owners Grant program, and they pay me like $8 an hour for clearing invasive species in my own woods, and they'll pay for fuel for my chainsaw, and for if I use herbicide for stump treatments and stuff, they'll pay for that too. So it's kind of nice to be able to get paid for working on your own property and improving things. But there's also EQIP funding that's available for putting in fencing if you're thinking about rotationally grazing, or we've done some stream bank stabilization projects on my farm. And so there's different programs that you can take advantage of to improve the quality of the property, but also get it covered because it's public good.
Got it. And before I ask Andy, we have one last question, which I think is a really good one. Are properties with clean creeks and streams difficult to find? Does their quality or the presence of a creek affect the appraisal and the price? Maybe Andy and Deanna could talk about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say that the quality, the cleanliness of the creek would not necessarily have, the job as the appraiser is to observe and report what the market is telling you. So if for instance, there are some underground, kind of like Deanna spoke of earlier, with any detriments that exist subsoil, a lot of times the market's going to flush that out. So if there is a problematic issue with a creek, it's usually defined in value, assuming you have good information to work with. But I can't think of any situation specifically where I've observed an issue with an open body of water or stream.
Deanna, do you want to just say a few things?
We have the Badger powder plant up here. It's it's an ammunition plant that was closed down. So there are certain properties that have well testing and things of that nature. So that's a detriment, more so like a local thing that you have to be aware of and be cautious of carcinogens, et cetera. But yeah, if you have a wonderful creek going through the property or a pond, and it's definitely going to enhance the value of the property. Now that's an intangible that's hard to put a number on, but it's about the market and how much they'll push that intangible.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to continue to get some great comments about the session and great expertise by all the presenters. So Andy, you get the cleanup slot to sort of share your last wisdom.
Fantastic. Played 4 years of college baseball, so I'll handle it. I'd say, I want to add some encouragement to our listening audience, because probably my most memorable day as an appraiser was a day I went out to a farm in DeKalb County. I met a gentleman who was in his 80s, and I was asked to appraise 9 different farm properties, which encompass over 1,000 acres of farmland. And he talked about his grandpa coming to the United States, purchasing the first farm, and then how he kind of took over the operation, expanded it, and his sons continued that. And that was the morning inspection. I met with that gentleman. In the afternoon, that same day, I met with another gentleman who had just immigrated from Ukraine and bought his first 40 acres and began his own organic nursery and vegetable farm. And he had, the time to explain his dreams and hopes of his children, which came with him. So everyone starts somewhere. And so I'd say that, it may seem that the deck is stacked against you right now, but, just be persistent, and there's opportunities. Just keep after it.
That's a beautiful ending. You hit a home run there, Andy.
Thank you.
So again, thank you especially to Deanna, Andy, and Paul. Great. Really appreciate your time and your insight. And thank you everyone for attending. Good luck. Let us know how we can continue to offer some good education services. Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.